All right, so let's take a look. Let me make this a little bit bigger. Let's take a look at the nouns that are presented in section 13.1 and 13.2.1. So these are all third declension nouns, and they do have some things in common, but then they have their own peculiarities. And the reason I'm having you memorize this list is because most third declension nouns will follow one of these patterns. And if you know the patterns, then you can decline the nouns. The only one that we don't have filled in is this one online on this line here, and I put the 14 there to remind myself to add it when we get to chapter 14. The three that we're going to look at right now are he polis, ho basileos, and to ethnos. So if we start with he polis, we see that in the nominative it's polis. Then in the accusative, there's two possibilities in the second or the third declension. We either have an alpha at the end or we have a nu at the end. And if a noun follows the police pattern, it's going to get the nu at the end. So we have police, Pauline, and then poleos. And this Omicron that is normal for the genitive singular in the third declension becomes an omega here in this pattern. So we have police, Pauline, poleos, pole. So you can see this epsilon iota pattern when we have this vowel at the end of the stem. It creates this diphthong here. So pole. And then in the nominative plural, we usually get this epsilon sigma is the normal ending for third declension. But when that gets added onto this stem with a vowel, it becomes poles. And oddly enough, the alpha sigma also becomes poles. So we end up with the same form in the nominative and accusative, even though this is a feminine noun. So normally it wouldn't be the same in nominative and accusative. Then we get the normal genitive plural, poleon, and again, the sigma iota nu ending on third declension nouns always does odd things. So here it's polesin is how that works out. So he polis, polin, poleos, pole, poles, poleon, polesin. Basileus is similar with a few exceptions. So ho Basileus, the king, and in the accusative, we have this time the alpha instead of the nu. So we get Basileia, but again, we get Basileos, Basilei, Basileis, Basileon, and a little bit different in the dative plural, Basileusin. And then the third noun we're going to look at is a neuter noun. And here we have, notice in the nominative and accusative plural, we get that ethne that came up somewhere. I think it might have been in our Bible translation. And I pointed out that we hadn't gotten to that yet. Well, here's where we get to it. We get ethnos. I think Duff tells us that this is technically an epsilon stem, but that's not going to be obvious because that epsilon is weak and it's going to get absorbed into these endings. So you get ethnos, ethnos, ethnus. So the omicron sigma becomes omicron upsilon sigma. Then we get ethne, which is similar to what we saw with bacille and pole. And then when we add the alpha, the normal alpha for the neuter plural nominative and accusative ending, we get an eta instead of an alpha. And ethnos, for example, is really common. I think there's one or two other nouns that do this that are pretty common. You'll get to recognizing them soon enough, so don't worry about it too much. And then ethnon, our normal genitive plural ending, and in this case, the dative plural is ethnesin. So that's it. That's the forms I wanted you to see. Um, I like what Duff says at the top of page 146. He says, don't worry too much about these nouns. They're not particularly common, and most of their forms are close enough to either the first and second or the third declension endings in the appropriate case and number for you to be able normally to guess them correctly. So that's the case. I do want you to memorize these patterns because these are the most common patterns. And if you know these, the rest they'll help you recognize them when you run into them in the Greek text. That's it for today.